Today we're going to be tuning the carburetor on our classic Mini. Hey everybody, thanks for joining me today on Classic Mini DIY. Today I'm going to be showing you how to tune the carburetor on your Classic Mini. Now this job I've gotten a lot of requests for, and I thought, hey, it's about time I probably got this video in for you. Now often this job is something that people think, hey, this is really difficult, I'm not going to be able to do this myself, I need to bring this to a shop. And today I'm hoping that I can dispel some of those myths. This job is not something that's super difficult, it is just very time consuming, and it involves a lot of trial and error. And a lot of times that just translates to it being a little bit harder, which is definitely not the case. Now the carburetor that we're tuning today is an HIF44, and that's an SU carburetor, which means it has a small float inside a reservoir, and that float lifts up and allows more fuel into your motor. Now most carburetors in your Classic Mini are SU carburetors, so they share that same float principle with the reservoir. A lot of older Minis will have a float reservoir that's actually outside of your carburetor. So the HS2, the HS4, those have float reservoirs that sit outside your carburetor. The only difference between that and this HIF44 is that the float reservoir actually sits built into the carburetor itself. A lot of the principles that I'm going to show you here on this carburetor are going to be easily applied to the HS2, HS4, and other SU carburetors that are used on these Minis. So just because this is an HIF44 doesn't mean you're not going to be able to use the same information on those other carburetors. So before we get started, one thing that I am assuming on this job is that the timing is already set on your Mini and your fuel is delivering at the right PSI. Now these are things that can be adjusted yourself outside of tuning your actual carburetor. So if your timing's off, this can impact the ability to tune your carburetor and get your car running right. And that is something that I'm going to cover in later videos. But today I'm just focusing on tuning the carburetor itself. Alright, so there are three different things that we're going to need to focus on when tuning our Classic Mini. The first of those is your needle. Now you may have heard people refer to the needle in your carburetor before, and what it actually refers to is this small needle that runs inside the jet of your carburetor. And now the diameter of that needle directly correlates to how much fuel is being delivered to your motor. Now you can think of it this way. If you have a larger needle, you're going to deliver less fuel to your motor. And the reason that is because this jet right down inside here is going to, the hole that the actual needle sits in there is going to be filled more completely with a larger needle. And that means less fuel is going to be able to pass around that needle and into your motor. Now if you have a smaller needle, it's going to allow more fuel to pass into your motor and thus make it richer. Now the second thing that we're going to need to look at while tuning these Classic Minis is your air to fuel mixture ratio. And that can be adjusted by a small screw right down here below your fuel line. And now that screw faces back towards the firewall a little bit. It's kind of diagonal, and it's a flathead or Phillips screw. Now I find it's a little bit easier to use a flathead adjustment screw to get back in there. It gives me a little bit more fine-tuned movement, and it can be a little hard to get down in here behind your carburetor. So I recommend building yourself a little tool. This is what I've made. It's just a little nut on top of the end of a drill bit. But you can find what works best for you as long as you can get back there and adjust that screw. Now that adjustment screw is going to move the jet itself, the little recessed part down in that hole there, up and down. And that helps determine the baseline for how much fuel is being passed around that needle. So if you can think, as the needle tapers down to get pointier towards the end of it, and now if you move the recessed part of that jet up, it's going to get closer to a larger diameter of that needle, which means less fuel is going to be able to pass around it. If you move that jet down, it's going to allow more fuel to get past because it's getting closer to the smaller end of the needle and the smaller diameter. Now adjusting the screw is as simple as turning it right or left. On these HIF44 carburetors, if you want more fuel, you're going to tighten it, which means that it's going to bring that jet down and allow more fuel to pass around that needle. If you want less fuel or you want it leaner, you're going to loosen it, and it's going to bring that jet up and allow less fuel into your motor. Great, so the third and final thing that we're going to need to look at while tuning these Classic Minis is your idle adjustment. So there are two settings for your idle. There's the fast idle adjustment and your standard baseline idle. So to adjust your baseline idle, it's done by sticking a screwdriver right down into this hole here, and there's a screw inside that hole. And as you tighten that screw, it moves your throttle farther and farther open. And that sets just what your engine idles at as soon as you start it up in the morning or you're just sitting at a traffic light. That determines what that idle is set to. Now the most ideal setting for that idle on these minis is about 800 RPM. That gives us the smoothest idle at the lowest RPM we can without making the car too drony and without using excessive amounts of fuel while we're just sitting still. Now the other adjustment is called your fast idle. And that's, you can kind of attribute that directly to your choke. So when you actuate your choke here, it touches this screw right down here. And that screw, you can see, slightly moves your accelerator open. And now your fast idle is going to be in the morning when you're trying to warm up your car. You're going to pull that choke and it's going to pull and open up that throttle a little bit more to make your car idle at a higher RPM and kind of help it warm up and get started and be able to run at that lower baseline idle that we set earlier. So at this point you may be thinking, well, that information's great, Cole, but how do I actually tune the motor? Well, at this point we're going to move on to the spark plugs. And our spark plugs are going to be the best identifier to determine exactly how close to our air-fuel ratio we are while we're tuning this carburetor. So let's take out one of the spark plugs on the car here and see how it's been running so far. Alright, so the spark plug's out, and as we can see here, it's almost pitch black on the end of that spark plug. Now if you're seeing that, what that means is that your car's running too rich. There's too much fuel being delivered to the motor and not enough air. So we're going to have to lean the motor out by turning that mixture screw left and loosening it. And now remember, what that does is it raises our jet higher and allows less fuel to pass by the needle and into our motor. Alright, we've driven the car around a little bit. Let's take these spark plugs out and see how they look now. Alright, so that spark plug's looking a little bit better. And now what we're seeing now is a lack of soot, which is good, and it's getting a little closer to that kind of golden brown color that we're looking for. The most ideal color for these spark plugs is about the same color as a rotisserie chicken. You're going to end up with like this kind of golden brown, and what that means is your car's running at the perfect air-to-fuel ratio. So we're going to put that back in, lean it out a little bit more, and this car should be about ready to hit the road. Alright, so we've taken the car for another drive, and we see here that the spark plug is now a whitish bone color. And what that means is that your car's running too lean. And now this is something that we're going to want to address pretty quickly, because if your car's running too lean, you run a risk of overheating it, damaging the pistons, and generally just kind of mucking up the car. So you're going to want to address this and add more fuel to the motor. And again, that's done by tightening the mixture screw and delivering more fuel to your motor by lowering the jet inside that chamber. Alright, so that covers the main points of getting your car running at just the right air-to-fuel ratio mixture and get it running just right. Now, like we said before, the correct idle is around 800. So I'm going to turn the car on, show you guys exactly what we're looking for as far as a baseline idle and what you should be looking for when you're tuning your car. So that right there is the RPM that we're looking for on our Classic Mini. You can hear that it's chugging along. It's not too high. It's also not so low that the car is struggling to stay on. Alright, that's it for Classic Mini DIY today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comment section below. I'll try and help you guys out with any problems you might run into when tuning your Classic Mini. Otherwise, enjoy those minis and motor on.